The afternoon sun baked the wooden fence rails and cast long shadows across the dirt at the Wickenburg livestock auction. Dust clung to the boots of every man standing around the ring, their faces shaded by worn-out cowboy hats and weathered expressions. The crowd of ranchers had gathered for good stock, strong, trainable horses. But when Lot 42 limped into the ring, a ripple of disappointment moved through the air. The horse, a bay gelding with a pink bandage on his left front leg, stepped awkwardly, favoring the injured limb. The auctioneer's voice echoed off the wooden walls. 9-year-old gelding, slight tendon injury. No reserve. Let's start at $50. No one moved. Not a single hand went up. The horse stood still, head low, breathing slow and heavy. From his dull coat and quiet eyes, it was clear this animal had seen better days. Around the pen, men whispered, "Ain't worth it. That leg's done." They weren't wrong. A lame horse was a gamble, and out here, gambles cost feed and time, two things no rancher had to spare. Standing toward the back of the crowd was a man no one recognized. He wore a sun-faded denim jacket, and his wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over most of his face. His beard was streaked with gray, and his hands, rough and calloused, clutched the auction catalog without ever turning the page. He hadn't spoken all day, but as the silence stretched and the auctioneer's voice faltered, the man raised his hand. It wasn't a proud gesture. It was slow, almost hesitant, like someone lifting a memory rather than making a purchase. The auctioneer blinked. $50 to the gentleman in back. Do I hear 70? Again, silence. No one competed. The gavel dropped with a loud crack. Sold. The man stepped forward. His boots stirred the dust, and his eyes shimmered in the light. He didn't smile. Didn't speak. Just walked up to the gelding and placed a hand gently on the horse's neck. The animal didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into the touch like he remembered it, like it meant something. Whispers broke out. "Who is he? You ever seen him before?" But no one got an answer. All they saw was a silent stranger and a broken horse, standing together in a ring meant for sales and silence. But in that moment, it felt like more than a purchase had just taken place. It felt like something long buried had begun to rise. Tom McCade walked slowly toward the holding pens, leading the bay gelding behind him with a short lead rope. The other horses snorted and shifted in their stalls, but Buckshot, though his name hadn't been spoken yet, moved without resistance. The old man didn't look back at the crowd. He knew their eyes were still on him, their questions unspoken but heavy in the air. Some of the cowboys murmured quietly, but most just watched in silence as the stranger and the wounded horse disappeared down the narrow path between the stalls. Behind the auction stand, Wade Tucker, the seasoned auctioneer, adjusted his mic and leaned toward one of the ranchers. "You know him?" he asked. Roy Jennings squinted in the sunlight, shaking his head. "Looks familiar, but I swear I can't place him. He's not from around here anymore, that's for sure." Wade scratched his chin. "A man don't buy a busted-up horse like that unless he's got a reason. A damn good one." At the edge of the lot, Tom paused by an empty paddock and let the horse walk in. He watched him for a moment, watched how the gelding limped slightly, but carried himself with quiet dignity. The horse turned his head, catching Tom's eyes for the first time in full. Something flickered there. Recognition? Pain? Tom felt a weight in his chest he hadn't felt in over a decade. His hands shook slightly as he latched the gate. "You remember me, don't you?" he whispered under his breath. The horse didn't respond. But Tom didn't need him to. It had been 12 years since Tom McCade set foot in Wickenburg. He had sworn never to return, not after what happened, not after losing her. Yet here he was, drawn back by a listing in a dusty catalog, a name that caught his eye, and a photo that nearly stopped his heart. The scar under the gelding's left eye. The white sock on the back leg. There was no doubt. This was her horse. Back then, Rachel had named him Buckshot when he was just a colt. Said he had fire in him, like a bullet ready to break out of the chamber. Tom had trained hundreds of horses in his lifetime, but none had matched the bond Rachel had with this one. She was only 19 when it all went wrong, when the accident took everything. And now, 12 years later, the last piece of her stood before him, limping but alive. Tom rested both hands on the wooden fence, breathing deep. The wind carried the faint scent of hay, sweat, and desert sage. Behind him, life in the auction yard went on. But inside him, something had shifted. The past he had buried wasn't dead. It had a heartbeat. And it was looking right at him. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low over the Arizona horizon, Tom parked his old truck beside the small rental cabin on the edge of town. It was the same cabin he had stayed in years ago, back when he and Rachel traveled the rodeo circuit. The paint was peeling now, the porch sagging slightly, but the memories hit him like fresh bruises. He led Buckshot to the small corral behind the building. The horse limped, but didn't resist. As he secured the gate, Tom placed a hand gently on the gelding's shoulder. "You made it," he whispered, almost as if he was talking to someone else. Inside the cabin, Tom sat at the kitchen table, a photo spread out in front of him. It was wrinkled and faded. Rachel, barely 17, standing beside Buckshot, her arms wrapped around his neck, both of them smiling like they hadn't yet learned that life could break you. His fingers traced the edge of the picture, stopping at the curve of his daughter's face. He could still hear her laughter echoing through the stables, still see her boots kicking up dust as she raced down the arena track. Time hadn't dulled the pain. It had only buried it under silence. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The desert air was warm but dry, and outside, the occasional distant sound of coyotes reminded Tom of just how far from peace he still was. He lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as Rachel's voice returned in fragments, her final words before the accident. Words he had tried to forget, but could never escape. "You said you'd be there, Dad. You promised." Guilt wrapped around his chest like barbed wire. Back in town the next morning, news of the mysterious bidder had spread quickly. At Emma's cafe, the regulars were already speculating. "He ain't just some drifter," Sheriff Dale Hammond said, stirring cream into his coffee. "He looked like someone I used to know. But that man disappeared a long time ago." Emma, wiping down the counter, paused for a moment. Her face changed. "Tom McCade?" she asked, more to herself than to anyone else. Meanwhile, Tom stood in the paddock again, watching Buckshot graze quietly. He noticed the scar under the horse's left eye, the same one from the day Rachel fell. He remembered yelling, the trailer door swinging open too soon, the young horse spooked by thunder. Rachel had tried to calm him. Tom had been too far away. Too late. Now, years later, the horse had survived. But the scar remained. Just like the one Tom carried inside. Tom hadn't planned to stay long in Wickenburg. He'd thought he would come, take the horse, and disappear again. But something had shifted the moment Buckshot leaned into his touch. It wasn't just the horse remembering. It was something deeper. As if the past had cracked open and refused to be sealed again. Each morning, he found himself waking before sunrise, standing at the corral fence, watching the gelding limp slowly through the paddock. The pain in Buckshot's leg mirrored the pain in Tom's chest, quiet, constant, and always there. At the cafe, Emma Dwyer wiped her hands on her apron and stared out the window. She hadn't seen Tom since the funeral. Back then, he was a different man, grief-stricken and unreachable. No one blamed him for disappearing, but no one expected him to come back either. Seeing him again, older, quieter, and still carrying that same hollow look, stirred something in her. She poured a fresh cup of coffee and nodded toward Sheriff Hammond, who had been unusually quiet that morning. "He's not just here for the horse," she said softly. Sheriff Hammond exhaled through his nose, folding the local paper. "No," he said. "He's here because he can't outrun it anymore." The whole town had buried the memory of Rachel McCade. It had been too painful, too sudden. A freak accident, they called it. But some folks always whispered there was more to it. And now that Tom was back, the whispers were growing louder again. Out at the feed store, Roy Jennings noticed the stranger too. Watching from across the parking lot, he finally approached. "Tom," he said, cautious but firm. Tom turned slowly, his weathered face betraying no emotion. "Didn't expect to see you again," Roy said. Tom nodded. "Didn't expect to come back." There was a pause between them, full of years unspoken. "People still talk," Roy added. "They never got the whole story." Tom looked away, jaw tight. "They don't need it." That afternoon, a boy wandered up to the paddock. Benji Harper, 12, with sun-bleached hair and a scab on his elbow, stood by the fence staring at Buckshot. "What happened to his leg?" he asked. Tom glanced down at him, surprised by the question. "He got scared once. Ran when he shouldn't have." Benji tilted his head. "He looks sad." Tom didn't answer. But inside, the boy's words struck deeper than he let on. That night, alone again, Tom sat outside under the stars. The desert was quiet, but his mind wasn't. He thought about the day Rachel died, about the fight they'd had, about what she said before slamming the truck door. She never looked back. And now, her voice echoed louder than ever. The wind picked up that evening as Tom stood alone in the open training ring behind the cabin. The old arena, once used for rodeo drills and barrel racing, was mostly dust now. Faded white poles leaned at awkward angles, and the bleachers sat empty, creaking with the push of the breeze. Tom hadn't stepped foot in this ring in over a decade, not since the day Rachel had fallen. Now, as he looked across the flattened dirt, memories came rushing back like a storm on the plains. She had begged him to let her run the course that day. He'd said no, said the colt wasn't ready. But Rachel had always been headstrong, just like her mother. She climbed into the saddle before Tom could stop her. Buckshot, still young then, had spooked at the sound of thunder and reared hard. Rachel came down wrong. Her head hit the post before Tom could reach her. She never woke up. And the worst part was, he'd seen it coming. And done nothing fast enough. That guilt had carved a hollow space inside him. He left town 2 days after her funeral, sold off the ranch, and vanished. He didn't tell anyone where he went, not even Emma. He couldn't face the silence. Couldn't face the way people looked at him, with pity, or worse, with blame. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her smile, heard her laugh, and then heard nothing. Just the echo of her last breath. Now Buckshot stood quietly just outside the arena, his legs still stiff, but healing slowly. Tom had wrapped it himself each morning, using the same technique he had taught Rachel years ago. The horse no longer shied away from his touch. In fact, he followed Tom now, closely, like a shadow. It was as if both of them understood this was all they had left of her. Emma arrived just after sunset. She leaned on the fence, watching quietly as Tom adjusted a pole. "I brought supper," she said, her voice soft. He didn't answer right away. Then he looked up, his eyes tired but honest. "You never came to the service," he said. Emma swallowed hard. "I couldn't," she replied. "You wouldn't have wanted me there." Tom didn't argue. He just nodded. Then she added, "You know Rachel came to me the day before it happened, right?" Tom turned, his heart suddenly pounding. "What are you talking about?" Emma hesitated. "She told me something. Something I think you need to know." Tom stood still, his hand resting on the top rail of the fence as Emma's words lingered in the air. The sky had darkened, but the silence between them felt louder than the wind. "She came to you?" he asked, not out of anger, but disbelief. Emma nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the ground. "The day before the accident." "She was upset, Tom." "Not about the horse, not really. She was upset about you." Emma reached into her worn leather purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper, yellowed and creased with age. "She left this with me. Told me to give it to you if something ever happened." Her voice cracked at the edges. "I never thought I'd have to." Tom stared at the letter in her hand, afraid to take it. His fingers curled slowly around the paper, as if touching it might shatter something fragile inside him. He unfolded it with care, and Rachel's handwriting, looped, slightly messy, but unmistakably hers, filled the page. She had written it like a confession. In the letter, she told him how angry she was about the way he had pulled away after her mother died. How the ranch felt cold. How she missed him, even though he was still there. She wrote about Buckshot, how the horse had become the only place she felt understood. And then, near the end, she wrote something that stopped Tom's breath. "I know you're hurting, Dad. But so am I. I need you to come back to me, before I stop trying to reach you. Please. Just look at me again." Tom sat down on the edge of the corral, the letter trembling in his hands. He'd spent so many years angry at himself for what happened, but now, he saw the years leading up to it. The silence between them. The nights he buried himself in work, ignoring the grief in her eyes because he didn't know how to face it in his own. He had abandoned her long before she ever climbed into that saddle. Emma sat beside him, close but not touching. "You weren't a bad father, Tom. You were just broken. Same as she was." Tom's voice came low, like gravel. "I thought if I kept moving, I wouldn't have to feel it anymore." Emma looked at him. "But now you're back. And she's still here, in that horse, in this place, and in you." Tom didn't speak. He only looked out toward Buckshot, who stood quietly beneath the stars, head lowered, as if listening. Something inside Tom finally began to crack, not to break, but to open. The next morning brought no peace. Tom sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee, the letter from Rachel folded carefully in his pocket. He hadn't slept. All night, her words circled his mind like ghosts that refused to rest. He could see her eyes in Buckshot's, soft but guarded, always searching for something just out of reach. And now that he had the letter, the truth weighed heavier than ever. She hadn't died angry, she'd died waiting. Mid-morning, a dust-covered pickup pulled into the gravel drive. The door creaked open, and Roy Jennings stepped out, his expression unreadable beneath his wide-brimmed hat. He walked with slow, heavy steps toward the porch, stopping at the bottom stair. "You got a minute?" he asked. Tom nodded, motioning him to sit, but Roy stayed standing. "I heard you were back. Didn't believe it at first. Thought maybe it was a ghost walking around town." Tom stared down at his boots, then back at Roy. "I didn't come to stir things up." Roy's jaw clenched. "You didn't have to. Just showing up did that." There was a pause. Thick, heavy. Roy continued, voice low. "You remember Caleb Dwyer? Emma's boy?" Tom nodded. "He and Rachel were thick as thieves." Roy's eyes narrowed. "He was there, Tom. That day. You didn't know?" Tom sat up straighter. "What are you talking about?" Roy crossed his arms. "Caleb was supposed to ride Buckshot that day. Rachel took his turn. She was trying to prove something. Maybe to you, maybe to herself, I don't know. But he never forgave you for it. Blamed you for letting her take that risk." Tom's face fell. He had no idea. Caleb had disappeared after the accident, just like Tom had. Two boys broken by the same moment, but in different ways. Roy took a deep breath, then added, "He's back in town too. Been staying with Emma. Word is, he saw Buckshot. And he ain't happy." Tom felt a dull ache rise in his chest. "Then maybe it's time I talk to him." Roy stepped down off the porch. "Just know this, he's not the boy you remember. He's got anger in him. And it's been waiting a long time." As Roy walked away, Tom looked out toward the paddock, where Buckshot stood with his head turned toward the house, watchful, still, as if sensing something coming. And deep down, Tom knew, the hardest part wasn't over. It was just beginning. The sun had just begun to set when Tom pulled his truck into the gravel lot behind Emma's cafe. He didn't need directions. His gut had already told him where Caleb would be. The same back porch where Rachel used to sit with a milkshake and dream about rodeo seasons to come. The same porch where Emma now stood, nervously drying her hands on her apron as Tom stepped out of the truck. "He's inside," she said quietly. "He doesn't know you're coming." Tom nodded, his jaw tight, and walked toward the screen door. Inside, Caleb Dwyer sat at a table near the window, shoulders broad, posture tense, eyes locked on the horizon outside. He looked older than Tom remembered, but still young in the way that anger can freeze a man in time. As Tom stepped into the room, Caleb turned his head slowly, his face hardening the second their eyes met. "What do you want?" Caleb asked, voice sharp, no greeting, no warmth. Tom stayed standing. "I came to say what I should have said a long time ago." Caleb let out a bitter laugh. "You think showing up with her horse fixes anything?" "No," Tom replied. "But I think hiding for 12 years made it worse." The silence between them was thick. Then Caleb stood, pushing his chair back roughly. "You let her get on that horse. She was trying to get your attention, Tom. You were supposed to protect her. You were her damn father." Tom didn't flinch. He let the words hit him like stones. He'd thrown those same accusations at himself 1,000 times. But hearing them from Caleb's mouth reopened wounds that had never healed right. "I failed her," Tom said, voice low. "Every day I live with that. I should have stopped her. I should have been the father she needed, not the ghost I became after her mother died. But I wasn't. I broke. And she paid for it." His voice cracked. "And you did too." Caleb's fists clenched. He looked away, jaw trembling, eyes burning. For a moment, it looked like he might shout again, or walk out. But instead, he sat back down slowly. "She wrote about you, you know," he muttered. "In her notebook. She said you used to be her hero. Said she missed him." Tom closed his eyes, his throat tightening. Outside, the desert wind rustled the cafe's old flag. And through the window, Buckshot stood tied to the truck, calm, patient, a living reminder of what was lost, and what might still be salvaged. The air outside the cafe was still and cool as Tom stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel. Caleb followed slowly behind him, quieter now, though his eyes still held the shadows of everything unsaid. Buckshot stood tied to the hitching post, ears perked, head turned toward them like he'd been listening the whole time. Tom untied the rope, running a hand down the horse's neck. "She trained him better than I ever could," he said softly, not looking back. Caleb stopped a few feet away, his arms crossed, voice lower now. "I used to watch her ride from the fence line. She had that way about her, like she belonged in the saddle more than anywhere else." Tom nodded. "She got that from her mother." There was a pause, just long enough to feel real. Then Caleb added, "You know, after she died, I thought about leaving too. Thought if I got far enough away, maybe I'd stop hearing her voice." Tom turned, finally looking Caleb in the eyes. "But it never leaves, does it?" Caleb shook his head slowly. "No. It just waits, for when you're alone, or quiet, or trying to sleep. A silence passed between them, not angry this time, but understanding. They were two men haunted by the same girl, the same day, and the same sense of guilt. But now, for the first time, neither of them was carrying it alone. Back at the paddock that evening, Tom watched Buckshot walk the fence line. The limp was still there, but lighter now. Day by day, the horse seemed stronger. Tom had started to believe that maybe, just maybe, healing was possible, not just for Buckshot but for himself. He ran his hand along the wooden post Rachel had once painted with her initials. They were faded now, barely visible, but they were still there, like memory, like grief. Emma arrived just before dusk, carrying a covered dish and a worn photo album. She and Tom sat on the porch, flipping through pages filled with younger versions of themselves, Rachel, Caleb, and horses long gone. They laughed a little, cried more. It wasn't closure, but it was something close. "You never really lose them," Emma said, resting a hand on Tom's. "You just learn how to carry them better." As the stars appeared overhead, Caleb pulled his truck into the drive. He got out slowly and walked toward the paddock. Without a word, he opened the gate, stepping inside. Buckshot didn't move away. Instead, he took one slow step toward the young man. Caleb extended his hand, hesitant but open. And for the first time in 12 years, he smiled. A week later, the small arena behind the cabin had been raked clean. Tom had spent hours clearing the weeds, straightening the old poles, brushing dust off the rails. It wasn't much, but it looked like it used to. Familiar. Oh. That morning, he stood at the gate, holding Buckshot's reins gently, like an offering. Caleb waited by the fence, silent, eyes steady. "You sure about this?" he asked. Tom nodded. "It's time." The gelding's leg had healed more than anyone expected. The limp was still there, faint, but Buckshot carried himself with quiet confidence again. Tom slid the saddle over his back and cinched it slowly. It had been Rachel's saddle, her initials still carved into the worn leather. As he tightened the strap, his hands trembled. It wasn't just about riding. It was about letting go. About finishing something that had once been left behind, frozen in grief. Tom stepped into the stirrup and mounted. The world went still for a moment, just the creak of leather and the breath of the horse beneath him. It felt right. Familiar. But heavier. He clicked his tongue and nudged Buckshot forward. The horse responded gently, easing into a slow walk, then a steady trot. Dust kicked up under their feet. Around the ring, the wind carried whispers only Tom could hear. Laughter, cheers, her voice. "Come on, Dad. You're getting slow." And for the first time in years, he smiled. Caleb watched from the rail, his arms folded. Emma stood beside him, a hand over her mouth, eyes glistening. The horse and rider moved around the arena like a memory brought to life. Tom didn't ride fast. He didn't need to. Every turn, every breath, was a quiet tribute to the daughter he had loved more than life. To the guilt that had caged him. To the pain that had finally started to loosen its grip. After a final lap, Tom slowed Buckshot to a stop near the center of the ring. He sat still for a long moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out Rachel's letter. Carefully, he unfolded it and let it rest against the horn of the saddle. Then, with a trembling hand, he let it go. The wind lifted the paper gently, carrying it a few feet before it settled in the dirt, like her words had finally landed where they were always meant to. Later that night, as the sun disappeared behind the desert hills, Tom sat on the porch, coffee in hand, Buckshot grazing quietly nearby. Caleb sat next to him, quiet but present. The silence between them no longer hurt. Some things don't heal fast. Some scars never fade. But sometimes, they stop bleeding.